Hi there, I'm Brad, the author of The Digital Plan and a senior digital strategist and trainer. I've been working in the digital strategy space for a little over a decade now, working with nonprofits and political campaigns. I was the 2012 Digital Training Program Manager for Barack Obama's presidential campaign, and since then I've been working with all kinds of organizations, international, local political campaigns, all kinds of different organizations, and really helping a lot of folks just fine tune and gear up their digital strategy. One of the things that I find critical in all of this strategy, and it's actually a whole chapter in the book, and we kind of come back to this, and it reoccurs in all of our trainings, is the digital engagement cycle. So we're going to actually talk through this a little bit today and kind of help make sure you have a primer on what it is, and that way when you're working with folks in your organization, you could have kind of this unified language and be talking about the same thing together. So this is the digital engagement cycle in itself. We always start off with brainstorming and planning. Now in today's quick training, we're actually going to go pretty deep. We're going to walk you through these all together. But I just want to give you a quick overview of how they interrelate and how they connect to one another, and then we'll really go into them more in depth. So brainstorming planning, here we're going to contextualize it by identifying our goal. What is the real world goal we're trying to impact in the world? Now where does this actually fit? Big picture here, our goal should be out here. And so we're always thinking about how we're actually driving towards this goal out here. So in brainstorming and planning, we actually want to get inside the box. Like in brainstorming, you want to think about how we're going to reach that goal, what are our strategies, and so we're narrowing it into we have a goal, and we need to think about how we're going to get there. Then, planning, we're putting our blueprints to work. We come down to the execution phase. This is where we start drafting emails, we're building web pages, we're doing the creative, the dev work. We're actually doing here we're identifying our tactics. So we've identified tactics here, and then we're going to start bringing them to life here. And we're going to be thinking about here, right? We're drafting all of this stuff. We're drafting emails, producing blogs, and then this starts to engage our audiences. So engage is about reaching out to your audiences, and the audiences aren't exactly the target of your goals, right? Audiences are the people who you're hoping will help you impact the goal. Now, here's actually where your target falls, right? So the target is what it is that you need to impact to make this change in the world that you need to see, right? So we're not just thinking about open rates and click rates and page views, but we're actually thinking about how does our digital engagement cycle help us meet a real world goal. Now, the other thing we like to talk about a lot here is sometimes the small feedback loops that happen as well. So between the execution and engagement phase, hopefully you're doing some A/B tests. Looks like the A and the B won't go for us here. But you get these small feedback loops that are happening here when you start sending out an email test, right? You get a subject line test back, and you figure out, well, what do I need to update? This also happens with social media as well. And you can think of this in different ways. Sometimes a big project plan has multiple engagement cycles that happen throughout it. And then you also have your bigger project plan that's kind of happening concurrently. So the engagement is happening, you're reaching our audience, right? We're asking them to share a thing, to do a thing. And then the question is, how is this impacting our target, and how does this move us towards our goal, right? So we know not every time do we get 100% to goal. All of these things are on spectrums and continuums. And so for us, the question is here, how far did we move it? And that's what gets us into the feedback phase, right? Did we get to some percent of our goal? When we're looking at the A/B testing down here, did we learn something about our content, about how people might want to engage with us in the real world, and what should happen here, right? So we think about all of the things we've done, we got the feedback. Hopefully, these start to exist as some sort of notes and documents that you think about organizationally, and the arrow continues, right? Because then next time we're brainstorming and planning, we want to kind of be tying that all back together again and thinking about how we can make some really positive impact. Now, what we're going to do is actually dig even deeper and really make sure we contextualize really well for you how this engagement cycle works and make sure your organization can all be on the same page. All right, so let's jump even deeper into the digital engagement cycle. So first of all, we're going to talk about brainstorming and planning. Obviously, it's where we kick things off. In the beginning, we need to identify the goals, right? And so we just talk about this on the board. You want to allow space for brainstorming to translate the goals into tactics, right? And so one of the big struggles we see a lot is organizations starting tactically first, right? Like we want to do X tactic because we believe it's going to get there, as opposed to really identifying the organizational, the real world goal and figuring out which tactics would be right to get you there. Then you want to lay the foundation for how we'll execute the project in this space. So this brainstorming phase, this is where we allow ourselves to get creative,
think through how we'll tackle a challenge before distilling it into a plan, right? And so, and we know we don't always have the time, right? So this is kind of the ideal scenario, right? Like sometimes we're putting together a plan really quick. Sometimes we're in a limited budget, and we'll talk more in other tips and definitely in some of our trainings about the difference between creativity and strategy. Right? They get confused a lot, right? And a different thing is creative strategy, right? And so sometimes you don't need a lot of creativity. You need to run a good strategy. You need to execute a playbook you already have on hand, or a playbook you've seen someone else run well, or in some of our trainings, we'll start going through a little more of the playbook side of stuff. And so we don't always need a creative strategy, but if we do have time, the luxury, the budgets to get really creative on things, this is the time to do it in the brainstorming and planning phase. And then we're going to bring it to life through the rest of the engagement cycle. So this is where we take the brainstorm, then we start to develop it into a plan. In our course, the fundamentals of strategic digital planning, we start talking about budgets, right? Like that's incredibly important. A plan is pretty meaningless unless you have the capacity, budget, resources to bring it to life, right? So the key to a successful brainstorm is to remain focused on what it is you want to do and who you want to do it for, right? So what is the real world change you need to make in the world? And how does this specific set of digital tactics help you connect to an audience that moves your target for the real impact on your actual goals, right? So that's where we want to be on this phase here. So as you go between brainstorming and planning, there are several essential items you're going to need to think about. We go a lot deeper breaking these down for you in our course, the fundamentals of strategic digital planning. But as we noted, you need to identify your goal. You think about what are the right tactics that are going to move the audience that impact your targets, right? And so that's really kind of fundamental stuff here, and we're going to dig a lot more into that in our courses. But just to give you a sense of how this works in practice, right? So we get to this next phase, the execution phase, the creation of needed items, meetings, and tasks to complete the tactics, right? And so each of the tactics, right, you're building a microsite, could be a part of your tactic skill set. Producing a video could be one of the tactics. A really robust and complicated video is going to take a lot of meetings, a lot of tasks, a lot of resources to produce, right? And so, depending on where you're at, what you're planning and doing, the execution phase can really be a pretty big phase. If you're building a big, complicated website that you need to launch for a project, you could be in the execution part of the phase for a month or months. And on projects that go over time, we're doing a big project. You may actually have several digital engagement cycles happening. We may have one big, large one that you're thinking about. And, the execution part of that could happen over months. Stages like engagement and impact will be happening, and you'll be continuing to do them, and they'll continue to fire. So, execution is not just like, hey, here are the things we do tomorrow. Big plans, these are months in the making. And in a short plan, right, you're putting together a plan for a thing you're going to execute next week. You have a limited time span, a limited budget, limited capacity. Sure, execution may be actually just 2 or 3 days, or maybe 7 days, right? It may not be a really long span. Just to give you a sense, right, that they can be very short and very long. And even individual things that we kind of think as rote tasks, like sending an email for a campaign, you would want to actually think about the engagement cycle in that once in a while, right? Like, how do we think about our engagement cycle when we send an individual email? What does it look like for us to go through each of these steps in a thoughtful way? That's the whole point of the engagement cycle, is to help you think more critically about each of the steps and making sure that all of the things you're doing are moving you towards a goal. It's the task phase, right? So it will involve more calls, meetings, and planning. But here's where you're doing the task-based items to bring your plan to life. Like we talked about, things like drafting emails, blogs, social media, website copy. You could be designing memes, images for blogs and emails, scripting, filming, editing videos, building, testing, refining websites. It is a space in the engagement cycle, I think, what people typically think of as the work happens, right? But actually, all 5 of these key points are the work to move forward and have a great organizational strategy, and to become strategist and to be excellent at this work. You actually have to think about all 5 of these as the work. And this is kind of your core tasks that people normally think of when they think of digital, because it's these tactics, right? And so one of the things that we talked about this in the beginning here, during most plans, execution and engage start to overlap. Items execution and engagement starting to overlap, right? So social media content's drafted, you publish it, and so people are engaging, right? And you get some feedback to analyze, and you continue to execute and engage more people. And especially if you've got a long project, you're thinking about a long timeline on a thing. You're going to see a number of small feedback loops start to happen in your engagement cycle. Engage. So we've been talking about this particular piece, right? Because there are these inherent moments where the cycle overlaps and feeds back into itself between execution and engagement. So this is where the tactics begin to meet with the targeted audience, often overlapping with execution. As we've noted, we just want to give you the distinct engage. We've been talking about it, but to give you the distinct definition, this is where tactics begin to meet with the targeted audience, often overlapping with execution. This is the point in the cycle where people, they see your planned content. Emails are being opened, text messages are showing up on people's phones. Really, does all of the engagement happen all at once, right? And so, many plans, even if it's rolling out over 24 hours or 48 hours, but more often than not, it takes over a week to several weeks of a project or a targeted campaign to engage audiences, right? And so, in some of these projects, things are rolling out over months. And so we're thinking about this engagement phase also as this can either be a short window or it can be weeks and months, depending on your programmatic planning, right? And so to really also think about it too, right? The engagement is a key part of the work, right? You're seeing some initial feedback on the tactics, right? Like the open rates, the click rates, kind of how are these things happening? This is also the work and refining execution, going back to the content, going back to updates on the website, right? We're still in the work. So I think too often folks jump to this idea that we have tactics, we're going to pull those tactics together and just execute them. And that's kind of it. And we hope for the best. But to really move this forward, we need to be thinking about each of these steps pretty critically. And so, like we said, rarely does it happen all at once, often takes several weeks, project to engage audiences, right? So you really need to be thinking about this, whether you're building a Gantt chart, however you want to think about it, in our project planning blueprint, we at least use bulleted steps to think about the flow of things that are rolling out. And we always want to be thinking about the flow, right? What is the series? How are the different tactics coming together also, right? So often, when we send an email, and especially as organizations get bigger or you develop your tool set, you're often building a special donate page, a special landing page for a campaign. You might be building a microsite, whether it's for a marketing campaign or some sort of take action campaign. You could be building a microsite. And so you have to be thinking about all of the steps it takes you to get to deploying that, to getting that out to people. And then as you are engaging and those feedback loops happen, you are updating pages, you're doing all of that good stuff, right? So that brings us to the impact. Now, this one's really important. We want to understand how the series of actions or content move the intended audiences, targets, and the goals. And so what I mean by this is the impact is different from engaging, because engagement is an action for the audience. You need to move the goal. The impact is focused on the larger goal itself. This often gets cloudy for folks, and there are a few exceptions where it may be very close to the same thing. One of those exceptions is like fundraising. Often in fundraising, your audience is inherently your target, right? You're trying to get them to donate, whereas, other kinds of campaigns you might be running, maybe organization does service work, and there, your goal is to impact the net number of people who are served. Possibly to get there, you need to recruit new people. So the audience is the folks you need to recruit to do the work for the bigger goal. This is all about making sure you're thinking about moving these big real world goals. That's what your impact is, right? Open rates, click rates, time on a web page, views on a video. Those are milestones. Those are benchmarks. So we go over those a lot in our fundamentals of strategic digital planning. That brings us to feedback. Feedback is the final piece of the loop. So it's a moment of deeper analysis of what worked, what didn't, how that impacts future planning or re-engagement around the current goals. Ideally, it's a blend of qualitative and quantitative analysis. So this one is the longest description, the longest definition here, because we're not just looking at click rates, response rates. We are doing that. We are looking at that, but we're also saying, how did that move us towards our current goal? And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it's very simple. Fundraising is the example where it's very simple, because you typically have a dollar amount you're trying to get to. And the question is, did you do it or not? And, how did all of the things help you get there or not? Other times it's more complicated, especially if you're doing, issue-based stuff, or you're trying to work on legislation, even local legislation, trying to pass something through your city council. Your engagement cycle, your entire plan that you work through could potentially just being about building influence. And so, you may have more qualitative ways to try to figure that out. And so you want to blend them together. You want to blend your qualitative and quantitative. Um, and as we said, this real feedback is a good blend of the two. And it helps you answer questions about what worked, what didn't, what to do less of, what to do more of, and maybe what to test again. And so, this is why sometimes there are engagement cycles inside of a bigger plan, right? So if you're planning a 3-month campaign, and not to say political campaign, but a campaign, like a marketing campaign, a persuasion campaign, it could be a service marketing campaign. You're trying to recruit people into your organization to take part, to engage, or you could be running educational courses, right? And question could be, did you get enough people into your course? And if not, like, what are we going to do different? Like, what are we going to test again? Where were we on budgets? Where were we on those kind of critical things? And so, and just to kind of iterate and close here, feedback isn't just what the open rate was. And we just covered this, but I just want to make sure you have this on screen and it's really sink in for folks. It's not just the views. It's not just the signups. It's what we can infer about those numbers and what kind of impact we actually had on our goals, and what is it we're doing? What is it we're updating to make this better next time? That is the digital engagement cycle. We are thinking about it all the time. As we said, it is the logo of the organization. And so, in all of our trainings and so many of our conversations, we are trying to help folks get back to this and think about this. And so hopefully find some value in it. Feel free to throw comments down below, and always feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help you think through this.